Hey everybody, and welcome to our regularly scheduled multi-tenancy working group session. Today, Jim, Divya, and Anuj will be going over the multi-tenancy benchmark project and doing a demo, and then Adrian's going to give an update on the hierarchical namespace controller project.
All right, thank you, Tasha. So hi everyone, this is Jim. I am going to give a quick update or just a review on the multi-tenancy benchmark work that we've been doing, and Anuj and Divya are going to do some live demos on what they've built so far. So the goal here is to kind of checkpoint and get some feedback, see what thoughts are on next steps. So just a quick recap for those of you who might not be familiar with the benchmarks effort. So what we're trying to do here is establish a set of guidelines for different levels of multi-tenancy, and then along with that, have some automated tests that we can run. On the idea is to be able to run these on one or more namespaces and report if those namespaces are properly configured for multi-tenancy. So there is if you on the GitHub, if you go into the multi-tenancy folder, you can read about the categories, definitions, the benchmarks we have so far. But today, what we're going to focus on is a subfolder, kubectl MTB, which is what Anuj and Divya have been working on, and we'll see that live. So just to kind of quickly set the context for the demo, and then I'll hand off to Anuj. So we're going to see two demos. One is with the tenant controller. We'll see how namespaces are set up through using the tenant controller CRs, and then how the MTB tool can run a set of benchmarks, report results, and then to rectify or fix particular problems. We'll see how we can use Gatekeeper OPA as well as Kyverno to install policies, then rerun the benchmarks so that we get a pass on like all of the profile level 1 checks that we have defined so far. So Anuj is going to show this first with the tenant controller. Then Divya will show also a similar demo, but with just a free-form namespace and a role that she sets up. So the goal here was to be very flexible and allow broad usage of this tool, so anyone can run it on any namespace independently of how that namespace has been set up or configured. So with that, let me stop sharing, and I think Anuj or Divya, whoever one of you wants to go first, you can share and go through the
Uh,
demo.
okay, this is Anuj. Hi everyone. I'm gonna show to how running the benchmarks on our tenant controller. So if you can see, let me show you first that I have a tenant set up already using the tenant controller. If we get a tenant, so we have a tenant 0 CR, and if you get the tenant admin namespace, we have a tenant 0 admin. And if you look into the tenant admin namespace, we have one tenant namespace already created. So let's get that. Okay, so we have our tenant namespace 0 CR already created by our tenant controller, and its tenant T0 NS0 is a reflection of the tenant namespace 0 CR. It is actual. So this is a CRD object. You can see if we describe this. Okay, so this is our tenant namespace CR object. So it is actually T0 NS0, that is its own namespace. So we are gonna run our benchmarks on T0 NS0. So if you wanna list the benchmarks, so there is a simple command kubectl mtb get benchmarks. So at present we have around 14 benchmarks. So most of them are profile level benchmarks, and we have a single second profile level benchmark, and we can filter these benchmarks according to the profile level. If you can get apply the flag at benchmarks dash p1, so it will show you all the level 1 benchmarks. So we don't have right now more than, we have only benchmarks all of 1 and single of 2. So here are the total benchmarks. So we are now gonna run our benchmarks over the namespace. So you can pass the user that you want to impersonate while running the benchmarks with the as flag. So if when you run the benchmarks, you will see a default console log that show the description, and you get a scorecard of all over what happened while running the benchmark. So you can see we have classified the benchmark result into the 4 categories: passed, failed, skipped, and the error. Pass takes place when it passes the benchmark. Failure is like it didn't pass the benchmark. Skip, I didn't pass, skipped any, so it is 0. And the error, like we have set the prerequisite for the benchmarks that need to be passed to actually run the benchmark. Like we have any benchmark that is for pod, but if the user don't have any pod privileges to create or something get, so we will put that benchmark into the error category, that user can't create pods. So let's assign the user the role to create the um, uh, pods, deployments, and other things that we need in our benchmark. So I have already created thing. Okay. Where it is. Okay. Yeah. Can you see my VS Code? Hello,
Yeah,
I am
we can
audible.
see it. Yeah.
So I will create now a role that is for the our user, that it has some privileges like pod service deployments and a role binding to my user, and resource quota for a benchmark that I will describe later. So I will apply this role and role binding. Uh, so now I have created. So let's run again the benchmark. Okay, so it actually passed all. Let me. So yeah, wait, give me a second. Okay. So yeah, it when I applied all the thing, like user can create code. So and when I run the benchmarks, it passed according to the configuration you have applied to the tenant namespace or the tenant user. And there is one more thing, like you want to create policy report, that is a new repo that Jim has been working on. So you can take the output as a policy report object. For that, you first need to install the policy report CRD that is here. You have to before and create the CRD in your cluster, and then it will run. So at the end, we have got like it is we have got a policy report object in itself the namespace for to get that pivotal that. Yeah, so we have the status that 13 passed, 1 fail, warning 0, error 0, skip 0. Now we have some more flags I want to show you. Like if you want to skip some benchmarks, like you can pass it in the skip flag. And if you want to go for multiple skipping benchmarks, just copy the IDs. So that I have skipped 2, so it will run 12 of 14. So yeah, we have got a new policy report that is created in again in T0 and S0. So you can get the policy reports here. So yeah, this is can be used for the multiple purpose that you can put it on a job. Jim can explain this better than me for the policy report aim to create that. And yeah, and we have another flag like you wanna run only the profile level 1 benchmarks to profile level 2 benchmark. You can just pass dash p1. It will just run only one only first level benchmark. So it will now run 11 benchmarks out of 14 because 2 were skipped in through via skip flag and 1 was skipped in the profile level flag. Yeah, that's it from my side. Yeah.
I'll take over now.
Okay.
If I just ask a question before we go on?
Okay.
2 questions, actually. One question was, we started by setting up a tenant. I see, that's the tenant CRD, right?
Right.
The tests that I saw, it looked like you were running them mainly in a namespace. Did the tests take advantage of any any particular feature in the tenant CRD, or was the tenant CRD just the way that these policies were enforced?
Actually, the main aim of the Kubernetes MTB benchmark is just to validate your name, the namespace you have provided is validating the guidelines or not. So it was just a,
Okay.
you can say just an example we used the for our demo. We use the tenant controller. In case of Divya, she will use just a normal namespace. She will create her own like Kubernetes create namespace demo or something like that. For me, I just use the tenant controller to just show you the application of that we can use different multi-tenancy aspects.
Cool. And the only other question I had is, what was the motivation to make the policy report a custom resource as opposed to, for example, like outputting it as a file? What's the benefit of keeping it on the cluster?
Yeah, so
Maybe,
that,
yeah.
yeah, I can provide some more context to that. So that the policy report is something that's being worked on in the policy working group. And there, there has been quite a lot of discussion on different ways to capture outputs from different policy engines, like OPA, Gatekeeper, Kyverno, Falco, even
So this
Kubernetes
will be
and
like,
others.
so this is a standard.
Exactly.
Oh, this is not. Oh, I see. It's a standard CR. Okay, cool.
Exactly. So the benefit here is for cluster admins. It gives one common way at a high level. You can get output from different policy engines and scan for reports within namespaces or at the cluster level. And then you would link to details, I guess, for different policy engines as required.
For like audit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so one question, Anuj. So I know here, like when you installed your manifest, did it also install the Kyverno policies, or how did those test cases pass? Were you?
Actually, I'm also, I had already set up all the things,
Okay.
but actually I had to apply the Kyverno policies. I have, you can see like I put there all in this here, but when I saw maybe there is a something cache problem, or I don't know it, so it applied already. You can say I didn't have to apply, so it passed everything.
Okay.
So
I can
all
just
the policies in a single file actually. So
Okay. Yeah, because typically I think if you do this on a empty namespace, you would expect the test to fail, and then you would need either Gatekeeper or Kyverno to
yeah
get the test to pass, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Let it, okay, over to Divya.
yes.
Hi, this is Fei. A quick question.
Yeah.
A few minutes late. So I see your test kind of pass. I see some of the tests say block using ABC. So I feel that thing can be done by kind of validation webhook. So did you install webhook, or how does the test run to ensure you cannot add IPC in your pod spec, or that is not allowed?
Uh, can
Yeah,
you?
so I can explain, and maybe Anuj, you can also show like one sample for a test case. So the tests are actually, some of the behavioral checks are actually trying to perform that like the operation. So for example, if you're trying to see, can a user, for example, um, let's say change resource quotas, right? So it's actually performing that application or that operation, and then, recording the result. And then, of course, for things like where we want the user to not access like host path or other checks, those would have to be enforced by a policy engine, right? So we focused on Gatekeeper, OPA, and Kyverno. We did not use pod security policies, I guess, as they're still beta there, and I guess the plans are to, I think it's a few years out, but the plans are to deprecate them. So instead of that, we're using policy engines to enforce the actual behavior to get the test to pass.
Oh, so okay, so okay, I know. So you already installed a policy engine, so it's not a,
Correct.
this is not empty.
No. Yeah, so I think maybe when Divya shows, we can try it on an empty namespace just to see. So first you will get a number of failures, but then you need either, a policy engine, or you could potentially configure PSPs for some of these to pass, and then you could rerun with that.
Yeah. So I'll be sharing my screen. Okay, so I don't have permission to share the screen actually.
Okay, you should be a co-host. Let's see. Okay, try now.
So, okay, so are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Sure. So currently I'll be demonstrating the tool using the local user and namespace that I created manually without using the tenant controller. So I created this namespace using kubectl create ns, and this is the local user that I have in the system. So I'll be running the benchmark on this. So as you can see, the most of the tests failed. This passed because the current user doesn't have the privilege that is create, update, and delete privilege. So that's why this test passed, but other tests failed. So what I will doing, I will picking one of the tests that is block use of node port services, and I will apply OPA gatekeeper here. So with the OPA gatekeeper, we need a constraint template. So actually I've already applied the constraint template because it takes some time to activate. So I will show it here. So you can see I have a constraint template here that is KTS block node code. So what consent template is actually, it defines the schema and the rigor logic of the OPA policy. And then after that, we need to apply a constraint, which basically defines the scope of object to which a specific constraint template applies to. So I'll be applying a constraint template here, sorry, constraint here. So just created, and I'll run the test again. Like as you can see, it passed. So yeah. So this test was done on a simple namespace and a user data created locally on the system without using a tenant controller. Okay. So that's all from my side actually.
So Faye, I don't know if that helped answer your question a little bit, or
Yeah.
okay.
But yeah, I understand most of the part, but for example, the node pod service, I think, yeah, I'm a little bit confused because these things has nothing to do with namespace, right? It's the node setup or.
Right. So I think one of the, and these tests, the ones we decided, I think we'll have to go and re-review the list and see what, how we want to position most of these checks. But the idea here was, of course, if you're using a node port service in a multi-tenant environment, that's a shared resource, right? So I know it's pretty common to use node port services for several things. So the question is this in a multi-tenant environment, what is the perspective? Is it recommended to use or not, right? So
Oh, I understand. Oh, okay, I see. So this one is just particularly check service object. So make sure you
correct.
node pod service. It doesn't mean that in the node you blocking certain part.
No. So what it's trying, the test will actually try to create a node port service and see that that's denied, right? So I think each one of these is written, what Anuj and Divya have done is that they've created a framework. And what we wanted to do actually in the next demo is we'll focus on what it takes to write a new test case and add a new benchmark. So there's a small framework to run these, to test this, and it's all done through using the client Go. So through, programmatically, you can check and validate and then provide output for this benchmark test.
Okay, good.
Hi, this is Xiaoning. And for this node pod service, in addition to try to create and see if it's rejected, do you try to list any existing node pod services?
No. So here we're just checking on that namespace as the user provided to see if that user is able to do the operations.
I see.
We're not auditing on the existing configuration in this case.
For this listed rules, are they all the rules or just a sample list?
Yes. So if you actually let me share my screen quickly. So this is it's still somewhat work in progress, but I'll show you what we have so far, and then we're actually adding to this, right? So if you go back to our wiki under multi-tenancy and then benchmarks. So there's a table of what we're calling profile level 1 checks, and then there's some proposals for profile level 2 checks, right? So these are all what Divya and Anuj showed are these checks we have automated, and now we are able to test on any namespace, right? And for each one of these, like for example, block privilege containers, if you click in, there's details, on what the rationale is, why we think this is, important for multi-tenancy, and then how to remediate, right?
I see, thank you.
So this structure, in the next couple of weeks, the plan is we will, so with what the work Anuj and Divya have done, this is also, it's very straightforward now to add new benchmarks, and it will generate a lot of these files and definitions from some YAMLs. So we'll show that in the next, in the next session, like 2 weeks out, on how to do that. And then we have to update this wiki with the latest tests, and we need to re-review what we do for profile level 1, 2, and 3.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm not familiar with the detail of this, so it's just a simple question. Can this benchmark tool be running against any Kubernetes cluster, or it requires some? Oh, okay, that's good.
Yeah, so it's a kubectl plugin. You can download that. We will publish it with Crew at some point, so you can download it, run it on any namespace. So the idea is you would run it in a namespace as a user, so that those were the two parameters. You just give it a namespace and what role you want to test with, and it'll do the checks.
Yeah, because I'm thinking we probably can also use it to running against the Arctos cluster. I
Right.
can see some rules probably not apply, but most rules still apply. We can get some insights from that.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great.
Consider running it inside the cluster, like maybe as an hourly process.
Yeah, good question. So one option we could follow something similar to what kubebench does is, right, they just containerize the command line and run it inside the cluster. So we could do the same, and since MTB can also generate policy reports, it could also be run as a cron job where periodically it would just generate policy reports, right?
So I know that, I don't know if Gatekeeper has audit mode, but I know they were thinking of adding it. So yeah, some kind of audit mode, basically.
Right, right. Yeah, not sure if Gatekeeper does, Kyverno does, so it does background scans. I think Gatekeeper does mostly admission controls at this point, yeah. But MTB can run as a separate cron job and report results.
Even better if it could detect the kinds of changes that might cause something to go from pass to fail or vice versa, and run.
Block that, yeah.
Well, not necessarily block that. That is more the job I would imagine of something like Gatekeeper, but like at least detect that something relevant might have changed. We should probably run the thing again and check some error. Cool.
Yeah, so maybe every time a new namespace is created, for example, right, it's possible to then run the benchmarks and report for that namespace.
Yeah, thanks. That's really cool.
Sure. All right. Yeah, great job, Anuj, Divya. And I think the next focus will be in making it easy to add new benchmarks, and then we'll go back and re-review the list of benchmarks and tests that we have.
Okay, so there was some error like Kyverno policy. Do you want to show again?
No, that's all right. I think for sake of time, we'll move on with the rest of the agenda. We can demo in a couple of weeks again.
Okay, no problem.
I should probably have a chat with you, Jim, about or the other members of your team about seeing how hierarchical namespaces interact with all of this as well. I know that you asked a question or two on Slack, but I haven't really thought about it systematically. But it was I enjoyed watching the presentation, so I got a better idea of what you're up to.
Yeah, definitely. I think we should. Let's both for virtual clusters as well as HNC. I think we should see how we can kind of tie the threads together on all of these.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Cool. So I guess next up is Adrian's update on HNC.
Sure. So I just wanted to give a quick verbal update of where we are. As some of you may have seen, if you're watching the repo, we have a new contributor called named Ginny. I don't know if she's on the call today, but she has been working on taking all of our terrible end-to-end bash scripts in the hack directory and turning them all into a suite of automated tests that we can run easily. And I've been using it to qualify the latest HNC release, which is 0.5.1. So a lot of hard work on her part, which has saved a ton of work for me, because for the last release, it took me many hours to run all of the tests and verify the results manually. So that's one really nice improvement, which is already paying dividends. Other than that, Ichi is working hard on the results of our API review. So basically, we did an API review with Jordan Liggett, and this is one of, like, passing the API review is one of the requirements that we have of graduating from the incubator directory into our own repo. And I believe that the virtual cluster project is also looking at going through a similar process. The security review is the other thing that will be required after that. So Ichi is working hard on that, and our goal is that we're going to hold the next minor release of HNC, which is 0.6, until we have that new API in place. So that will be V1 Alpha 2. We will have a one-way upgrade process so that anybody who's using HNC now and has a bunch of CRDs of our custom resources in their cluster will be able to install the new one. It will automatically update all of your existing CRs to the new format. You will not be able to downgrade, but it's a fairly easy process to back up your cluster if you want to ahead of time. And so she's working hard on that. Other than that, as I said, I'm about to release 0.51. It's got a couple of minor bug fixes on top of 0.5. Basically, it makes it harder to delete an object by accident that you shouldn't be allowed to delete. And then the only other news is that we've actually integrated HNC at Google. We've integrated it into Anthos Config Management and Config Sync as a beta product. So if you're using either of those on GKE, you can go in and turn on what we're calling hierarchy controller, and it'll install HNC and a couple of integrations. So Config Sync and ACM have actually adopted the HNC tree label model, so that you can use a common way of referring to the hierarchy that was in your Git repo, but which wasn't instantiated on the cluster, as any namespaces that you do create on the cluster that weren't available in Git. So that's the update for HNC. Any questions from anyone about that?
And can you briefly talk about the API review? So it sounds new to me. So what is the process of doing that?
Oh, I apologize. I think it went out on the Slack channel, but we may not have sent it out on the mailing list. If you go up, you should be able to see the results of the reviews. So yeah, basically we went to, I don't know how you become an API reviewer, to be honest. Being short-legged is probably a good qualification. But he and Mike Dinesi went over the V1 Alpha 1 API and looked for all the kinds of, any kind of stylistic inconsistency. So for example, we had enums that were starting with lowercase letters, whereas the standard is that they start with uppercase. We weren't using a standard condition format, which apparently we're all supposed to be moving to a standard way of reporting conditions. And then there were a variety of problems, mainly on the reporting side. Like our specs are pretty much unchanged in Alpha 2 as they were in Alpha 1, but the status, a bunch of the ways we report the status is changing. So yeah, we basically just went to sig-auth. We asked him for a review. He gave it. It was the attendees were myself, Ryan attended, Ichi and Jordan and Mike, I think, were the main attendees. And Ichi wrote up a report about what's changing, and I believe that got sent to the Slack channel. Ichi, if you're on the line, did you send that out to the mailing list as well, or just Slack, or someone else?
I think it's it's linked in the doc.
Yeah, I can see it on Slack, and it was on the mailing list as well. Why don't I'm going to copy the link address and paste it into the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good to me. So I'm afraid, they ask to change too many specs API, that would be trouble to me, or because.
Sorry, what was that?
No, I was afraid, they ask to change quite a few fields in the spec, and that'd be a problem.
Yeah, they didn't ask us to change certainly very little structural, nothing that a webhook can't handle. And especially because we're still just at the alpha level, we actually got the advice that we shouldn't even be bothering with webhooks. We should just make people upgrade by hand. Didn't really like the sound of that myself. So instead, we decided to sort of split the difference and go with a one-way upgrade conversion webhook, which is really not what you're supposed to do, but we felt was better than having no automated upgrade tool at all.
Okay.
And we've discovered all kinds of entertaining dependencies between cluster CA bundles for validation webhooks versus CRD webhooks. Yeah, if you want to know about webhooks, talk to Ichi because she's discovered a lot of fascinating stuff lately.
Okay, that's good. Thanks.
Thanks. Anything else? Any other questions for Chinsi? Not. I believe Josh is next on the agenda.
Hey there. So if you look at the agenda document, I've pasted in the results from our what should we call a group of Kubernetes clusters survey. Unlike our internal survey, this one actually has a pretty clear favorite. Cluster set won out for the aggregate scoring because it was loved and liked by more people and hated by fewer people than any other name. It was also 50% of the respondees, of the 100, there were 112 respondees, 50% of them picked cluster set as their favorite. I did look through the additional name suggestions. We put a blank in there of what terrific name did we miss. I didn't see any winners in there. There were a lot of suggestions for names that we already disqualified, particularly cluster group. The only new ones were cluster pool, cluster fleet, and cluster array. From my reading, none of those are compelling enough to disregard the sort of clear mandate of the survey. There were a couple of blockers mentioned, but those blockers do not apply to cluster set. So it kind of seems to me that cluster set is our clear winner here. Discussion?
So Josh, what is the context of this? Is it
This is for what do we call the object that is a group of Kubernetes clusters that share the same namespace? Since that is a thing that we can do now, at least in alpha.
I think this was discussed a lot in the sig-multicluster group. I don't think it's been discussed a lot in the multi-tenancy working group thus far.
Oh, I'm in the wrong meeting.
I mean, it is relevant because the fact that well, it is said this is for a group that shares namespaces, and namespaces are a key attribute of tenancy because all of our tenancy models use namespaces, except for perhaps virtual clusters, which are a bit of a special case. So it is maybe interesting to have this idea that across it looks like cluster set is the winner.
Yeah.
You could have a common set of tenants that are using multiple clusters, either across regions or availability zones or other things like that. So even though I think this hasn't been discussed here, it's probably a good reminder for people on this group to keep an eye out on sig-multicluster because there's some interesting stuff going on there that could be relevant to us.
Yeah, I mean, to put a background, right, multi-cluster, the actual implementation of multi-cluster is a number of different concepts that are actually being implemented separately, right? There's network sharing, which there are several different tools for. There's job sharing across clusters, which is the old federation approach, and it's still a thing. And now one of the new things we've gotten is namespace sharing, right? As in, you can say that this particular namespace is going to be, and its objects will be shared across all of these clusters. And there's a reconciliation loop to make sure that the objects in the namespace exist in all of these various clusters. But we needed a name for that. So what happened? Oh, I see what happened. So Paul canceled the meeting for a sig multi-cluster, and this shows up in my calendar as multi-tenancy. But because the calendar is so small, I only see multi.
Yeah, I sometimes call it multi-X when I used to attend.
Multi-X, yeah. So anyways, you know that's going on. It hasn't been announced yet, but when we have our next multi-cluster meeting, the survey's over, so we'll be picking that as a name. And incidentally, if y'all need to run surveys, I've become the sort of community person for manipulating the CNCF SurveyMonkey instance. So feel free to ping me on Slack if you need a survey run.
Good to know.
Good to know. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. Good meeting. We enjoyed the naming update, Josh. Thanks for thinking of us. And yeah, I'll post this to YouTube. And if anyone has anything they'd like to talk about at our next meeting, please add it to the agenda.